Good afternoon, everybody, or for some people, possibly good morning. My name is Meredith Gibson, and I'd like to welcome everybody to URISA's Climate Community Resilience Committee webinar series. Today's topic is co-producing data and tools for climate adaptation planning, an introduction to the USGS Climate Adaptation Science Centers. And I am pleased to introduce you to our presenter, Sarah Burton, a data scientist and biologist at the U.S. Geological Survey's National Climate Adaptation Science Center. And as we begin, please note that everyone is muted, but we do encourage everyone to post questions in the Q&A during the session. And also note that, as you just heard, the session is being recorded and that the recording will be posted to URISA's YouTube channel soon. Again, my name is Meredith Gibson. I'm a GIS director at the Institute for Public Strategies and based in Southern California. And I'm happy to be here with you all and happy to share this space with Sarah Burton. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Sarah. Thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you, Meredith, for the warm welcome and the invitation to come here and present to you all today. As I get my screen ready to share, as Meredith said, I am a data scientist and biologist with the Climate Adaptation Science Center, which for those of you who are not very familiar with, I'll give you an introduction to that in a few moments. But it is within the U.S. Geological Survey and the Department of Interior, just to orient everybody. In my role as a data scientist, I largely work on stewarding our data products to publication and ensuring we're meeting federal data policies and standards and those sorts of more data management related tasks. But I also work a lot in the spatial space and providing technical support on projects. With my background in biology and wildlife sciences, I'm really able to hone in those different skill sets that I have. So really happy to be here today and present this this lovely program that I've been with for the last 5 years. Let's get started. Okay, so just to kind of give a brief overview so everybody is aware of where we're going today, I'm going to talk to you about the Climate Adaptation Science Center Network, for those of you who are not familiar with it. Kind of get into the way that we work in the co-production space and different ways that you all might be interested in getting involved in the network and working with us. I'll highlight the different data resources that we have available and how to find them through the different federal web spaces that we have and data catalogs. And then I'll get into something a little bit more fun and interesting and highlight one of the mapping projects that I have been involved in that really highlights the way that we work as a network. So to start us all off, I want to introduce the Climate Adaptation Science Center Network to you all. This is a partnership-driven program that teams scientists with natural and cultural resource managers and local communities with the mission of delivering science to help fish, wildlife, water, land, and people adapt to a changing climate. So in order to achieve this mission, the network is comprised of 9 regional centers, which are depicted here in the map. Each of these different colors is a different regional center. And then we have our national center, which is in Western Virginia, in DC. So each of these centers has a number of USGS employees that work specifically for those regions. And then we also have a suite of university and other non-governmental type of partners that are working hand in hand with our USGS employees to achieve our mission and goals. So this is more of a funding mechanism from the USGS side of the CASC program. We provide funding resources and assist in conducting science on the ground as well. So I'll dive a little bit more into that as we move through the presentation. So as I mentioned, the map that you just saw, those are our consortium partners that work directly with the USGS in those regions. But we also have a number of other partners that those consortium members and just in general as USGS that we do work with as well. So a number of different DOI bureaus, including Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service. We have other federal agencies such as NOAA or the Department of Energy agencies as well get involved. A number of state agencies and non-governmental organizations like the Nature Conservancy and those sort of NGOs. And then universities, of course, are our bread and butter and make up the majority of the partners that we work with and fund. But as well as that, we work a lot with Indigenous communities, our federally recognized tribes, as well as our Native Alaskans and Native Pacific Islanders as well. So between the federal agencies that we work with and university partners, it's almost 50-50, as you can see here, and the number of projects that we've funded. So we really try to divide up the funding that we have across the different partners and sectors. As I mentioned, we work a lot with the state and local government partners to really drive the science that we're conducting. We also have a lot of students and postdocs that we support at the CASC network. Oh, and sorry, I should back up. I'm saying CASC. That is our lovely acronym for the Climate Adaptation Science Center. Sorry for not noting that earlier, but just realized that that's maybe not something that you all have heard before. So yeah, when I say CASC, that's what I'm referring to. And just to get back to this diagram, after the interruption, we also work a lot with, like I said, the Indigenous communities, and to get that work to be the most effective, we also have what are called tribal resilience liaisons. These are individuals who are really familiar with working with tribal entities and have that rich knowledge of working with the sovereign nations that comprise large parts of our country. So working with all of these different partners, kind of as I alluded to with our especially state and local partners, we are really trying to produce science that can be used in decision-making processes. So we don't want to just put the knowledge out in the landscape. We want to have meaning behind what we're doing. And so we really try to produce our science through the decision-making lens and what's going to be the most actionable on the ground. Just to give you an idea of the amount of work that we conduct in a year, this is a snapshot from 2023. We funded over 60 projects, had 190 plus publications coming out from utilizing resources from past projects as well, such as data sets and tools. In 2023 alone, we had 40 different data sets and tools be published. This is just from the Climate Adaptation Science Centers as well. And then we support, as I mentioned, a lot of students. So we really emphasize our training programs with students and fellows through USGS and our consortium partners. And so to get into this, to give you a little bit more background and hopefully help you grasp this concept of this federal consortium partnership a little bit better, I want to highlight that just one more time. So again, they're co-located at an institution. So for example, the North Central region of the CASC network is hosted by the University of Colorado Boulder, which means they lead the partnership with these external non-federal entities. So our USGS and our university partners are located in the same space. Again, the consortiums are just comprised of a breadth of partners from NGOs to state agencies. And that's really how we are harnessing this diverse expertise to push forward the science that we're producing. And along with our USGS side, being able to support students and early career researchers, our consortium partners are also vital in producing training videos and building capacity with our early career individuals on the landscape. So really to foster that sense of collaboration and co-production of science, really starting with those early career folks is key in the work that we do. So this idea of co-production of science is to ensure that our science, again, is actionable. We work directly with the different stakeholders and partners in our network to identify those management needs and ensure that the science that we're producing is going to have effects on real-world decision-making processes. So this is why the co-production aspect of the CASC network is really ingrained in the whole process, from planning all the way to funding. We work directly with stakeholders to identify what needs they have on the ground from a year-to-year basis. So they're informing annual science plans, which trickles into our funding solicitation to the consortium network, so that we're aligning with our science plan and funding projects that are really going to address those stakeholder needs. So with that, I just wanted to put a plug in to bring this map back up so you can see once again, the list of organizations, largely universities, that are consortium members. What are consortium members? The consortium members are the institutions that can receive funding through our program. However, you can be a partner and collaborate with one of these entities if you're not a part of one of them. So that's a great way to enter into the space of working with the climate adaptation science centers if you're interested. This map is available online on the USGS website, and I provided the link here in the slide. So if you are interested in partnering with a university or one of these entities, maybe you already know somebody in that space, maybe you don't, but this is a great way to get involved and contribute to the science that we're producing. Another program I want to highlight that is another good avenue of entry into working with the Climate Adaptation Science Center Network. This is a forthcoming program that is being developed called the Climate Adaptation Technical Services, or CATS. And this program is meant to be like, an IT ticketing system. So you have a technical question that you need help answering. So you can submit a form to the CATS program, and they can respond to you and service the natural resource management community and help answer the question you may have. So the idea for this, the services that may be included in this, as they're in development phases right now, is providing something like a topical synthesis on the available resources out there. So say you want to know what the available resources are on sagebrush biome in the West, for example. So you could submit a request for assistance, and the CATS team would put together the documentation that we maybe have available for you on that topic. Other things like data visualization or mapping, if maybe your organization just doesn't have the capacity to focus on those sorts of more technical lifts, that's something that the CATS is looking at providing as well. So there's kind of a variety of different services that they're still working on what it's going to look like. And they're envisioning this to be an iterative process with the requester. So if you come in and you have a question, maybe the person who is interfacing with you on the question has a different approach that maybe would work better or answer the question more holistically. So it's really a back and forth to make sure we're customizing the products to the user's needs and delivering, again, that science that's going to be actionable and usable to our decision makers. So this program, again, is in development. We're hiring staff, we're outlining how it's going to work. And in 2025, it's probably going to be up and running as a pilot program. If you are interested in learning more about the CATS program, my email will be at the end of the presentation. Please reach out to me and I can put you in contact with the person who is leading this initiative. But it's exciting, it's great, and it's hopefully another way to interact without possibly getting involved in a full-on project. So transitioning from the CASC network, how we work in co-production, to data resources. So especially programs like the CATS program, the Climate Adaptation Technical Services forthcoming program, wouldn't be possible without the use of open data sources and all of the resources that USGS and other agencies have out there available for use. So you may be familiar, you may not, but I just wanted to highlight the different ways that you can access not only CASC data resources, but USGS and the federal space as a whole. So the first point of entry for data products from USGS is sciencebase.gov. This is our main data repository where the data themselves are actually stored, along with metadata to describe the data, of course. But this platform isn't super user-friendly. There is a search interface, but most people get overwhelmed by it. It's not as intuitive as it could be. So to remedy that, the USGS developed what's called the Science Data Catalog. This is a catalog of the metadata records that are stored in ScienceBase. So you can search those spatially by topical areas and find the data resources you need that will point you back to wherever that resource lives, largely on ScienceBase. So it's meant to be a more user-friendly way to search for the resources out there. Then from there, it also flows into data.gov. So data.gov is the data catalog for all federal data resources, as well as local and state agencies that have chosen to put their data resources on data.gov. So this is another way, if you're looking to share the resources that your entity has, you may be able to have them be shared in this catalog. And so that's a really great way to search topically, again, spatially, the whole thing, for where you can find data resources, and it'll point you to the repository that it's stored in. And the last place that our data flows into, USGS as a whole and CASC, is geoplatform.gov. So this will be a little bit more specific and applicable to this group, being spatially oriented. So the Federal Geospatial Data Act requires that all of our federal data resources all of our federal spatial data resources end up in geoplatform.gov. So this is where you will likely find all of the spatial data formats. So it's looking specifically for those sort of raster or vector level spatial formats, and pulling them into geoplatform.gov. So that's just another space that USGS resources as well as CASC will flow into. With all of that in mind, all of these different catalogs that we're working in and the different levels that we're able to find the data that we produce, we really strive to meet those open data standards and principles, and are federally bound to ensure that our data are open so that we can enable participation in research, and provide timely access to the resources available. But with being open, there comes a suite of principles that at the CASC, more specifically, we tend to look towards to ensure that we are handling the data as carefully as we can. And so that first suite of principles is the FAIR data principles that are more about the openness of data, ensuring that the data are findable with the use of DOIs, digital object identifiers, making sure they're accessible, putting them in open data repositories, ensuring they're interoperable where applicable. So that's more about the data formats that we're using, and then ensuring that they're reusable. So that's where all of this really, but in particular, that is where we really try to make sure our metadata records are robust and contain all of the information one would need to reproduce the data. The other suite of principles, the CARE principles, were developed originally through the lens of Indigenous data governance and in particular data sovereignty issues. So the CARE principles are something in particular at the CASC network we really are passionate about, because we work with a lot of Indigenous communities and a lot of sensitive data types. So with these suite of principles, we can ensure that we are looking at the data products that are being produced for the collective benefit. Who is it benefiting to release these data publicly? Looking at the authority to control. So here we're thinking about what data ownership looks like, data sovereignty for these tribal communities, to make sure we're being responsible. So looking at why are we putting the data out there? What is it going to impact? Really trying to answer those questions from the beginning of our projects. And considering the ethics behind releasing these data, especially, again, when we're looking at our tribal nations, to ensure that we're being ethical in our data management practices. So we take all of these suites of data principles, our open data policy, and meld that together into our data management approach for the CASC. So a lot of this we've covered. We're federally bound by law and also the USGS public access plan to ensure that our data are made publicly available. With those few exceptions, when we're working with tribal and indigenous communities or sensitive species, threatened endangered species, there are a few mechanisms we can utilize to safeguard those data as well. Because we are a federal entity, we're legally and we're need to make sure that our data are accurate and of high quality. So we put them through a robust review process so that they're legally and scientifically defensible if needed. And then organizing the data, as mentioned, into readable, understandable language when we're thinking of how we're writing up metadata and how we're presenting them to the public. And a lot of that goes into, we'll point towards our public-facing website, the CASC Project Explorer that is linked here and up in this little bubble. That public website, we work hand in hand between our data team and our communications team at the National Climate Adaptation Science Center to ensure that we are posting information about our projects and data in user-friendly, public-friendly ways. And then the last thing I'll say about data through the CASCs, I want to highlight, again, in particular for this group, some of the spatial data standards and format considerations that we work with. So one other data portal that gets ingested to all of those downstream catalogs I mentioned is the USGS GeoData portal. This is specifically for releasing large-scale three-dimensional climate data, typically in NetCDF or ZAR formats. So because those formats are so particular and these data sets can be 100 gigabytes to a terabyte large, the GeoData portal is working to chunk the data. So if you're looking, if something is countrywide, if it's a CONUS level data set, but maybe you only need something for California, you can already go in there and chunk it without having to download the data. So we use, again, NetCDF ZAR, we're transitioning to that as our data format. The other thing that is in transition that we're working to utilize more is cloud optimized GeoTIFFs instead of just regular GeoTIFFs, so we can enable more programmatic use of these large data files. We always provide our spatial data in open formats such as GeoTIFFs or again, NetCDF, those sort of things that can be used in multiple different programs. But since we do have a large Esri user group, just in general and at the USGS, we'll often release the shapefile or geodatabase as well as the open data format so that one can choose which one they would like to utilize. And then just noting on metadata, we use the Federal Geospatial Data Committee compliant metadata standards. So that is just kind of a good way, all of this to say is a good way to ensure that our data are high quality and are consistent across the data that we're releasing at the USGS. Okay, so now that we've covered the CASC, we've covered co-production and the data resources that we have available, I want to take you into a specific project that I have really been involved in that really pulls together all of those concepts and give you a little something more fun to dive into here. So this project was mapping riparian climate refugia in the north central region of the US. So the Rocky Mountains, a little bit into the Great Plains, that area. This work supported 8 states in their climate science and adaptation planning for state wildlife action plans, or SWAPs, for those of you who are familiar, that were being revised in 2025. So most of these are coming to fruition now. So this project started in 2021 to start looking at what resources we could provide to them and to aid in their planning efforts. So the North Central CASC researchers, one of them being myself, we also had partners with different state agencies. The 8 states that were involved were heavily involved throughout this process to make sure the product that we're developing is going to be intuitive and usable for them. So in that iterative process of what can we do for you, what questions do we need to answer, we landed on riparian areas. So especially in the West, riparian areas are really important and serve as biological hotspots with their structural diversity and being a transitional zone between terrestrial and aquatic environments. They provide crucial corridors for movement, in particular in the West, where it's a lot drier, in the semi-arid regions of the Great Plains as well. So this was identified as a priority area for the wildlife resource managers that we engaged with in this process. And taking it a step further, looking at from the lens of climate change, what could we do with the area of riparian? What could we do that would really help them with their wildlife action planning? And that's where we landed on informing on climate change refugia. So these are areas that are expected to remain buffered from climate change and maintain biodiversity into the future. So we thought, okay, if we have these refugia, if we are looking into future time periods to inform these action plans, why not do it from a riparian lens? So that way we can allow these agencies to have the resources when they're planning 10, 20, 30 years out for where to preserve. So to do this, we had our question, we had what we're aiming for. We did utilize 3 different data sets that I will go over shortly that were federally supported research. So these were resources that were already available out on the landscape that we could utilize, as opposed to having to reinvent the wheel and develop a new data set every time. So we're looking at climate refugia from a riparian lens, so riparian climate refugia, and we want to define what is going to be suitable areas for the future. So we did a lot of research to decide what method we wanted to use to produce a suitability index, do more formalized coding versus existing tools, and we actually landed on the Esri suitability modeler tool in ArcGIS Pro, which I'll get into in a little bit. So that was kind of the first step in our approach process. Then we needed to decide what measures we wanted to include in this index. So we decided on a couple of structural landscape resilience measures, what formations, what's on the ground that's really going to be there unchanged currently, right? So what our current landscape measures are. And then we had measures of projected climate change that would likely impact riparian zones. So here we were looking at runoff or rain, moisture, those sort of things, and then heat indices. So those were the 2 main climate impacts that we were looking at. And then what the next step in our process, looking back at those landscape resilience, those structural landscape resilience measures that we pulled in, one of those measures that we wanted to get at was the idea of connectedness, since these climate refugia can serve as corridors for species that need to move between areas. We wanted to look at how connected riparian areas were as one of our measures. So this was a layer that needed to be produced based on the methodology that we chose. So we produced connectedness as a data layer from the landfire data set from US Forest Service via a moving window analysis. So we did produce this data set, but from an existing data set. So it was kind of a 2-step process there. And then finally, we mapped these measures and standardized them across the different climate scenarios that I'll highlight in a minute, and then needed to bin the data. So to dive into these layers a little bit more, we had these 2 climate variables. As I mentioned, we went with warm days in the 90th percentile from the Climate Toolbox, which is a resource that has a variety of climate data resources available. So That's a great place to go if you're looking for climate information. A lot of it is in NetCDF that you can convert using ArcGIS Pro or Python or other scripting languages into TIFFs or other usable formats if you prefer that. And the warm days, the variable explained would be it's the change in the number of days between this one in particular is mid-century to historical or late century. The other variable that we looked at was total runoff. So this gave us things like snow melt as well as precipitation through the USGS monthly water balance model. So another existing data resource federally produced. And this is looking at the percent in change in runoff between the time period and from the future and the historical. And for this, we looked at just the runoff time frame, the wettest time of the year, March to July. So it's a somewhat common practice when we're looking at riparian areas to look at when you're actually going to be getting the most runoff from annually from the landscape. And just a note for these climate variables, over here on the right, you'll see the different scenarios that we utilize in the two time periods. So every iteration that we did, there were these 4 considerations. So our output data has 4 different sets of data layers. So we had climate scenarios from RCP 8.5, looking at moderately hot and wet, and then hot and dry. So we wanted to kind of give the managers the variety of futures that you might see based on the temperatures and the moisture levels. And then looking at the time periods, it's commonly binned into these mid-century and late century. So we're looking at a near-term effect, near-term climate change effects versus the long-term climate change effects. So that's helpful, especially with the managers looking for their state wildlife action plans to affect in the next 10 or so years versus looking more long-term, what might be a consideration. Those landscape variables that I mentioned, there were 2 of them. So in total, we had these 4 variables, but two landscape ones specifically. The first one I'll highlight, we pulled from an existing data resource, again, from the Nature Conservancy this time, who is one of our partners that we work with quite frequently. And this was their layer of landscape diversity. So this is the layer that's looking at more diverse landscape means there's means that it's more suitable likely, right? So it's less of that developed landscape, less of the ag fields, those sort of things. So this was one of the metrics that we use to get at the landform conditions on the ground. And then the other one that I mentioned is riparian connectedness, again produced by US Forest Service land fire data set using the moving window analysis function in ArcGIS Pro. Which looks at the landscape that you identify and says how connected is it, how close is it to how many cells are of a certain value within the distance that you set. So we used 3 different buffer zones to kind of get at this because we were looking at a variety of wildlife species that these state wildlife agencies might be interested in, such as amphibians might have a smaller range versus the larger mammals that we have on the landscape out there, such as moose or elk or something like that. So we really wanted to consider these different buffers and provide those data layers to the resource managers should they need them in the future. So we took those data layers, once we got them formatted, converted, all standardized, and we started working to get them ready for the ArcGIS Pro suitability modeler. It's essentially layering these on top of each other, these 4 layers, to give us our output indice of suitability. So the overall workflow for the suitability modeler: determine and prepare the data, which we had done at this point, transform the values of each layer into a suitability scale. So in this way, we took the data from each of these variables, standardized it, and binned it into 1 to 5, from least suitable to most suitable. And what I mean by standardize is we had, for example, warm days. we had data from those different climate scenarios and time periods. So we had essentially 4 data layers we were looking at that had varying ranges of the values. And we wanted to standardize the bins that we were assigning to the layers. So grouping those values together into, 5 even categories. We wanted to make sure we were considering all of the possible values so that you could compare across scenarios when we're looking at the full output. So that's what I mean when I say we standardized that and binned it from 1 to 5. We did this for all of the layers. And then as you're pulling it into the suitability modeler, you can weight the layers based on those bins that you assigned and combine them. So it's an additive. You can choose how you want it to produce your output, but we just did a simple additive process here to create our suitability model and our suitability map, which you can see here. The other thing that the modeler can do for you, if you would like it to take it a step further, is it can locate areas to preserve for the future. So if you want the program to identify the most suitable areas for you, it can do that as well, or you can just examine the data yourself and determine maybe you have some more discrete knowledge of the landscape that would cause you to choose certain areas over the other to preserve. But so yeah, this modeler, it'll highlight again certain areas and give you scores and show you why it maybe is the best or worst place to preserve in the future. So once we did that, we got everything from the suitability modeler. We had our 4 outputs. So these are 4 suitability index maps for the 4 different scenarios and timeframes that we were working with. So you can see here on the left, these are our 2 climate scenarios. And then up here on the top are our 2 time periods. And so this allows you to kind of look across and see which one of these scenario time period combos is going to be the best. And it allows our managers to quickly look and identify with these color ramps what areas or states within their state, or which states or areas within their state would be the best place to preserve. So, so this is again based on projected changes in the summer warmth and landscape runoff across the scenarios compared to historical conditions. These indices had the possibility of ranging from 4 to 20, with the higher values reflecting a greater expectation of climate resilience. But the ranges are slightly different between scenarios, just based on, again, those values that we input when we standardized the bins that we assigned. So from there, we had those static maps, but we also wanted to produce an online dashboard for the state managers to interact with. So I'm going to start this little video, just navigating through it as I talk about it. So this was a good resource for these state level managers to access if they didn't have the capacity to download the data layers, open them in RJS or QGIS or something like that, and they just wanted to be able to look at the data and interact minimally with it online. So we put together this dashboard that has all of our data layers on it. They're able to click through, turn things on and off of all of the layers that we talked about. If they want to see what variable is really influencing the outputs that we produced. This is allowing them to do that and get that fine-grained look into the data itself. As I'm sure many of you are familiar with online dashboards. We also included a few different ways for them to bin the data. So this would be to look at the data through EPA ecoregions of the US. So maybe they're only curious about the Great Plains ecoregion, or another binning we added was hydrological unit codes. So maybe you're just looking at certain watersheds and you have more discrete ways to zoom in and look at that. So we ensured that this was something that they could look at the specific values of suitability, that they could see, they could compare the different models down here in this window for their state, for the different models, and depending on where you're zoomed in on. And then we also wanted to provide summary information by state as well, and quick and user-friendly way. And so that is also embedded into this map. As you click on it, you can see all of the different averages for the scenarios and data layers that we have. So all that to say, this was a project that really was the quintessential idea of co-production for us, where we're working with these state managers on the ground to inform the process throughout. So from the beginning, helping us formulate what problem we wanted to tackle, what question we wanted to answer, getting a much needed resource for these wildlife managers through identifying riparian areas to serve as climate refugia. We worked with them throughout the process to make sure a data dashboard is what they wanted, or if they would use the data resources themselves as well. And again, these results were relayed directly to the states as soon as we produced them, so that it could help inform their 2025 State Wildlife Action Plan revisions. And then moving forward, the methodology that we used here is being implemented and considered across other climate adaptation science centers. So as you saw in the map, this is just that north central region, plus Idaho. I think geographically it made sense to include them. But for example, the Northwest region, which includes Washington State and Oregon State, they are considering using a similar methodology and adding to this online dashboard over time. We have official data release and publication that just recently came out if you're interested in reading more about the study and learning more about how the CASCs work together with their partners. So wrapping this all up and packaging it together, the Climate Adaptation Science Centers, as a reminder, is the network USGS partners with the consortium universities and other entities to investigate how the natural world is adapting to climate change. There are several ways to get involved in CASC research, whether that is partnering with a consortium university to start a project with us, or engaging in our climate adaptation technical service program yet to come. With that, there's a lot of data resources that we are producing on an annual basis to tap into, and they're available through a variety of data catalogs and resources. And then we highlighted a project, the Riparian Refugia mapping project, index mapping project, to really pull together all of these concepts and showcase how we co-produce science at the CASC network. And with that, thank you so much for listening and engaging in this presentation. And my contact information is here as well. Feel free to reach out with additional questions if they don't get answered here today. I would like to give a special thanks to a few folks at the USGS, Emily Fort and Ryan Boyles, who are really integral in the work that we do. And then my team for the Riparian Refugia Mapping Project, Blake Kozak, Elisa Wade, and Kim Skordansky, really were wonderful to work with. So there are a couple of ways that you can interact with the Climate Adaptation Science Center here on the slide as well. Our social media, our email, and then a newsletter sign up if you're interested in getting monthly updates of the work that we're doing. And with that, yeah, I will kick it over to see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was such a wonderful presentation. And so just wanted to see, we do have a few questions, and I'd also like to just kind of reiterate my special thanks also to Emily Fort, who is a good friend of mine and former classmate of mine, as well as colleague, who put us in touch with Sarah. So my immense thanks to her as well. So one of the questions that we have, Sarah, is the CASC applied only for the US? Are there any plans to kind of expand this into other countries or make a global resource?
Yeah, that's a great question. At this time, it is mostly the US, but that includes all of our territories and the affiliated Pacific Islands. So we do work in, again, in the South Pacific a lot. So Palau, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Mariana Islands, those groups we work a lot with, including, again, our territories, Puerto Rico, Guam. We do at the National Center, they work a lot internationally as well. So they're involved in a lot of those international working groups on climate change as in informing on that from the USGS perspective. But we do have some researchers who work, for example, in the Mekong Delta, in the Southeast Asia. They work and collaborate with partners there. So more so the USGS scientists who are working for the CASC program do collaborate with those outside of the US, but we don't fund entities that are in other countries unless they're partnered with one of the consortium members in the US.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess kind of like on the other side of the spectrum, are community-based organizations. And so I know that you said that you work with other NGOs and kind of, community-based organizations kind of falling under that umbrella, but do you work down to like that granular level? Or because I saw like, I understand like, you're working like with state agencies, but what about, even going down to municipalities or to regional authorities, and even going beyond that to sort of like community level groups?
Yeah. It really depends on the region and what you make out of it. So that's the great thing with the CASC network is really anybody can get involved in the work that we do. You just need to find the right avenue of entry, right? So, for example, I'm based in Southeast Michigan in the Midwest. So we have Michigan State University as one of our consortium members. They're allowed to receive that direct funding. But if one of their researchers has a project that they're proposing that is really ingrained in the community level of management, or like you said, just a community group, they can definitely participate. So we don't have any regulations against who can partner with our consortium members who are leading, who are seen as maybe the lead on the USGS side for that project, but we do have a lot that work with local communities, again, especially Indigenous communities. They're not always region-wide projects. We do have projects that are on fine scales, that are only maybe in a small municipality, or looking at one single water body. Again, being in the Midwest, we're looking at the Great Lakes. And so working with a lot of those local communities who live along the Great Lakes is really important. So we have a lot of different opportunities. And if you are with a local community or a local agency, and you are looking for what projects might be going on in your area, the CASCprojects.org, you can really see who is involved in each project on there. You can see the organizations and see where maybe you could partner as well.
Great. There's also a couple of requests. Could you possibly provide a link to the newsletter sign up or
Yes.
in the chat?
Yep. Yeah. I left it up sharing my screen in case if anybody wanted to take down, but I'll take that down and can provide that right now. So this is the link to, let me get to the chat. The USGS CASC website, there's a sign up link there for the newsletter. And then more information, if you would like the regional newsletters, there's the national level that covers all of the regions, and then specific ones if you're only interested in certain regions.
Thank you. And then I guess also maybe perhaps put your email address as well. Yes. Thank you. Yep. Okay. Let's see, any other questions before we move on? Others? Okay, let's see. I am going to now share my screen. And again, Sarah, thank you so much for presenting and for being here. This is such valuable information. And I think that, I guess even I can appreciate it even more as someone who's on the East Coast and whose family is down in Georgia and under a tropical storm watch because of the hurricane coming through. It's so important that we have these resources and that data already, situated and on hand in order to be able to have a better response for for not just our people, but also for our wildlife and our ecosystems, and preserving those will be interesting to see kind of what comes out, what sort of impacts there will be because of natural disasters and how that data can be, utilized. So thank you very much. I am going to share my screen. And the slideshow. So again, I thank you all for attending the URISA webinar series today. Our mission is to promote and grow the geospatial profession and support professionals at all stages in their careers with essential training and resources such as the one that Sarah presented today, and to sustain and strengthen the organization. So we have a couple of other planned webinars coming up. So the next one is going to be kind of, I'm really interested in from the public health perspective. So beyond the headlines of practices and policies to improve the use of GIS for pandemic response and public health, coming up October 24th. I'm at 2 p.m. Eastern. And so we'll hear from a presenter on how on the role of GIS and COVID-19 and how the National Pandemic GIS Playbook plays a role in effectively using spatial data in public health. And then the second webinar that we currently have planned will be presented by two members of URISA's Community Resilience Work Group, Terry Martin and Kevin Mickey, and they will share some insights on key takeaways in public safety and emergency management from the Inspire Summit. And then, of course, we've got the URISA, GIS Leadership Academy coming up in person in Fort Worth, Texas, and then virtually coming up December 2nd through the 6th. And then the LEAP conference, which is the Location, Enterprise, Addressing, and Public Safety, that will be virtually January 28th and 30th through the 30th. And then the 28th GIS Valuation Technologies Conference coming up in Columbus, Ohio in March. And you can, I don't know if I was scrolling too fast, but you can scan the QR code to get more information, or you just go to our website, urisa.org. And then, of course, the big event coming up, not too far around the corner, is GIS Pro coming up in Portland, Maine, and that will be October 7th through the 10th, and it'll just be an awesome event to receive opportunities in education, training, making some connections, and just kind of working out some solutions. And there will be 8 pre-conference workshops, 36 sessions spanning 11 program tracks, and featuring more than 170 speakers. So a great event coming up. And so if you're not currently a member of URISA, I invite you to come and check out our website and all the resources that we have. And if it's something that you'd like to be engaged in, we'd love to have you. We'd love to talk to you. So please feel free to reach out. Excuse me. Let's see. See if there are any others in the chat. I think that is it. So, I think that thank you all for being here. Thank you, Sarah, again, so much for presenting. I hope you were able to walk away with some valuable information.
Yes, thank you as well.
Thank you. And with that, I think we will close. Thank you.